Absolutely. So, as you mentioned, it started with the killing of Mahsa Amini and with the slogans focusing on women's rights and freedom. But soon after that, the protesters, because the protesters knew that under the Islamic regime, they wouldn't achieve any freedom and rights. So they linked their demands on women's rights to the general demands of a political change in the entirety of the regime. And you can see the slogans such as death to the dictator or we don't want the Islamic Republic as the most popular slogans. There are also other signs that telling us that this uprising has a revolutionary nature. The way that the protesters act, such as counter-attacking the security forces, neutralizing their cars, their men and their equipment is actually very extraordinary.
Yeah. You know, this is, of course, the morality police have been seen as a way of oppressing women, but is it both men and women at this point that want to change?
Yeah, I think it's because millions of Iranians could picture themselves the injustice and discrimination that they have experienced over the past 4 decades in the life and death of Mahsa Amini in one way or another. And also, we need to remind ourselves that the country was in a revolutionary mood before that. So the whole country was about to explode, and we as Iranians expected this. This is not an unprecedented uprising. We knew that sooner or later people would come to the street and would like to stay until the regime will be toppled.
Yeah. Do you see that happening, though? The government has said that the protesters need to be dealt with decisively. There are concerns there'll be more violent crackdowns.
Yeah, the response of the government was a brutal crackdown as expected. There have been several reports of shooting the young protesters. Several young women are amongst them. But I think if two things happen, there are still two things missing. One is at the domestic level. If the workers join the protesters and calling for a general strike, we can see a prospect for a radical political change. And also at the international level, if the international community takes its responsibility in order to stop the bloodshed that the Iranian regime is actually conducting, that would be another element that now we cannot see that. For example, the governments such as Australia, they can activate the accountability mechanisms such as the Magnitsky Act to sanction those who are responsible for the current and previous atrocities. The UN can act more actively, like what we have seen in the case of Ukraine or even Syria and Myanmar. This is the expectation of the Iranian people who are fighting with the security forces, which is one of the most equipped security forces in the region, with their empty hands, and they have nothing but their bravery.
Yeah. Do you see that, I mean, there could be a level of international support for the Iranian people, but we even saw President Raisi going to the United Nations last week. There is this concern that there is this sort of diplomatic effort to sort of get him along back into the nuclear deal, for example. So do you think there's going to be the diplomatic will to show that kind of support?
That is the part that is still missing, because what we have seen from the international community were empty words of condemnations and urging the government such as Raisi, who is himself is a criminal, is an accused of committing crimes against humanity since the 1980s until now, to investigate their own crimes, which is actually a mockery of justice and accountability to the eyes of millions of Iranians. We think that the nuclear negotiation has always been used by the Western as a justification of their indifference, their inaction. However, we think that if they now take the right side, which is the side of the Iranian people, and act actively and effectively, they can stop this atrocity. Otherwise, the Iranians would consider them as a complicit to the international crimes that is now taking place in the streets and detention centers across the country.
And you talked about a broader display of protest from the workers. Do you think that will happen?
The teacher unions just joined yesterday, and we think that a prospect of workers joining the protest is likely, but the level of suppression on the organization and associations are very enormous. One thing is very clear now: this is the beginning of the end. People in the streets, the young people, Iranian Generation Z, they don't want to leave the streets until a real change is realized.
Shadi, appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.